What is the plural of film noir? Is it films noirs? Is it films noir?
It's films noirs, technically. I know. Les films noirs, yeah.
Well, you're a better man than me because the number of different spellings I've had from basically everyone who writes an article about it, for me, the spelling is different. The enunciation is just
Wait, the only way to do it is to cheat, right? You just say noir films. That's it. Done.
brilliant.
I'm your host, Sergio Angelini, and welcome to Tipping My Fedora, where we discuss movies, books, TV, radio, and much more besides, all from the darker side of the street. My special guest today is Steve Rogers, who's in charge of archive and product development at Hammer, which is now part of the John Gore Studios company, and which of course is that venerable studios from the 1930s that made so many of the best of British, and is still hard at work putting out content. I've worked with Steve on a few projects, but specifically on MANTRAP, which has just come out on Blu-ray and 4K ultra high definition. So we got stuck in right away to talk about the marvels of that film and several other that are upcoming. So time to catch up with Steve and see what's lurking just behind that creaky door.
Welcome to the podcast, Steve.
Great to be here.
And okay, I've got some quick questions for you, but the first one I'm going to ask you is actually to please introduce yourself and tell the listeners who you are and why we're chatting.
My name is Steve Rogers, and I am one of the people at Hammer Films who make their living making new stuff from old stuff, which sounds like a magic trick, but it's a fun thing to do. It's, you know, we look at the archive and we see, in certain instances, some old and loved films, and we can give them their day in the sun again, like the one we're going to be talking about in a minute, which is MANTRAP, which I think I'm right. I think I'm right in saying that no one has seen anywhere in decades.
As far as I'm aware, I mean, I'm going to ask you about this a bit later, but as far as I'm aware, it's never come out on any home video anywhere, right?
The Hammer archive is sort of like the gift that keeps on giving. There's about 200 films and shorts, I think, give or take a few, and they all have various levels of rights issues and stuff like that. Funnily enough, MANTRAP is one of those ones which didn't. It's just that for years and years, no one had done anything with it. It's a great film, and one of the things that I'm probably jumping in and out of some of your questions here is something we'll cover afterwards. But one of the good things this iteration of Hammer's doing is we're not just sort of doing, oh yes, we'll just do Dracula, Frankenstein, the Mummy, and then that's it. You know, bye, we're done now. The whole point of doing what we're doing is to include a heady mix of classics and rarities. And that's going down really well with fans and collectors. Because, you know, some of these films, you know, if you're a really hardcore Hammer fan, you may have seen once, maybe. You know, a million years ago when such things were shown on Channel 4 on weekday afternoons and things like that. But for a lot of people, a lot of these rare films, this is their first time coming to them. So, and that's quite a cool thing to think of, actually. You know, the old Hammers are new films to some people. You know, everyone's, you know, every Hammer is somebody's first Hammer, but some of these films, especially MANTRAP, as you just said, you know, it hasn't been out anywhere in years. This is going to be a lot of people's first experience of that film.
As far as I'm aware, it was. I mean, I've had an off-air copy recorded on VHS, and that I then transferred to a DVD. But I've been making do with that for probably the best part of 25 years or something, at least, I think. And I can't quite remember when it was on, but it was a long time ago, and it was a rather fuzzy print, and it'll be great to talk about what this is like in 4K.
The ring of a telephone may be a warning of a certain danger. A letter thrown into the crack of a door may contain some dreaded message. The dense dark of night may cloak the skulking shadow of a man determined to trap her. She had every reason to fear this perilous man-trap.
You, Steve, as someone who I think I was aware of before because you worked at Network, the late lamented.
For my sins, yes, I was at Network for 20 years, nearly, give or take. For the people who don't know, that was a company for whom there's quite a bit of nostalgia at the moment because, you know, it's like we'll never be seen again. And over a 20-year plus period, we released, I couldn't even begin to tell you, a couple of thousand, 2,000, 3,000 maybe, old British TV series and films on DVD and Blu-ray. Yeah, I mean, the whole home video landscape has changed now, but for a long while actually, Network changed the game. You know, got a lot of respect for it. It did. Okay, there are probably some films and TV series that should never have seen the light of day again. but that's down to the individual. You know, one person's classic is another person's rubbish. So it's a movable feast, and it was really cool to be able to work on those things in that period. Just as it's cool to work on the Hammer ones now, even though, you know, the collector's landscape has changed. So, you know, you couldn't really do just a straight film with a trailer and then say, thanks, that's it, bye. I mean, people have larger expectations now. But yes, I mean, that's where I sort of earned my spurs along with a bunch of other people.
Because I used to do the reviews for the TV home video reviews for Sight and Sound. So I used to deal with people like Luciano, you know, and people like that. God. And which, again, we're going back a fair way because I stopped doing that in 2014, you know, so I'd been doing it since the end of 2005 or something. So, and it got to the point where I think we all knew each other quite well. And I think, was it Grace was working there for a while as well? Yes. And she was quite into Pilates and other things. And you knew all sorts of things about people's lives because we were having long chats and, you know, and I think she was in a stage play that Kim Newman wrote, I think, briefly, that I went to see, that just off Leicester Square. And she, things like that. It's extraordinary, you know, and there was just such a lot going on. My shelves are covered in Network content.
You must have. But lots of people do, and sometimes they don't even realize it because they'll say, you know, where, you know, what's your background? And I'll tell them, never heard of them. And I'll say, have you got the Sweeney or On the Buses or The Prisoner or The Persuaders or, you know, Man in a Suitcase or something on your shelves? And they'll usually say one or more than one. And I'll say, well, there you go. Then you know what it is. There were points when we were doing maybe 3 or 4 releases a week, which is just, you know, I mean, it's amazing. Sort of unsustainable now. And like I said, the market's moved on. These days, if people are going to spend 50 quid or 30 quid or whatever on something, they don't just want 2 or 3 things on a disc. There's an expectation that you have all this lovely context with it, which is obviously what we're doing to not inconsiderable success at Hammer.
Was Captain Kronos the first?
Yes, Captain Kronos. Yeah.
A bold and unexpected choice, and I think a great one.
It may be bold and unexpected. For us, it was obvious and expected because at that point, at the point we started working on it, it was Kronos' 50th anniversary. And I think I'm right in saying that it's the only Hammer film where the 2 leads were still alive at the point we started working on it. Unfortunately, as we were getting it ready, poor old Horst got ill and eventually died.
Who is he? Your master? The K stands for Kronos.
Captain Kronos. And he's not my master.
Witchcraft and necromancy. It's the rumor in the village.
What's wrong? I thought I saw someone over there.
The girls you spoke of, they were not drained of blood, but of youth, of life itself.
What he doesn't know about vampirism wouldn't fill a flea's codpiece.
There are as many species of vampire as there are beasts of prey. Their methods and their motive for attack can vary in 100 different ways.
This thing attacks to sustain life, youth. That's what we'll be seeking.
Kronos!
apart from the fact it's a cool film, it's a really good release as well. And I think I'm right in saying that it sold out within like a week of release or something like that.
Which is encouraging. Yeah.
Well, very, very encouraging because, I've been around this market long enough to know which way the wind was blown with these things. But obviously, if you're not there, you're thinking, really, all that money, all that stuff just for one release, will people buy this? Which is a very valid question, and the answer was obviously yes, they would. And the thing is, Hammer, in much the same way as people who collect Arrow and Indicator releases, I would call them more collectors than fans. Fans in the main, they love the film. Extra material, maybe not so much, but the whole collector ecosystem now is, you look at some of the releases from Arrow, Indicator, 88 Films, Second Sight, and they're all kitchen sink releases, which if you collect these things is absolutely brilliant, because one of the things that we've learned over the last 18 months of making these things is that it doesn't matter whether you're a fan or you're a collector, you love context, absolutely love context. So the days when you'd buy a film and if it had a featurette, it would maybe be 20 minutes long and it would talk purely about the production of the film, and that would be it. Those still have their place, we still do those, don't get me wrong, but when we did something like Stolen Face a couple of months ago, we said, okay, then in this film, we have a main star, Paul Henreid, he wasn't actually blacklisted, he was grey listed. So effectively he was exactly. He was unemployable in the US, but nobody actually told him to his face. Right? So you had him working in the UK because he could only find jobs of worth in the UK and Europe. But one of the writers on that film was the biggest friendly witness to the House
Martin Barkley.
I think that's the one. Yeah, he was. Yeah, well, if you Google him, it basically says he was the biggest stool pigeon for whodunit. So you had, and I don't know whether it's a unique example, but you had, it probably certainly is for Hammer films, where you have someone who was a stool pigeon on the crew and someone who was a victim of what they did in the cast, and when you have a situation like that, you can't not cover it in the context material. So we found a really nice American professor who'd literally written the book on this and said, would you like to do a new program and do basically a Ladybird version of the House and American Activities? And he went, yeah, brilliant. So, we did that, and that had it was incredibly well received, that was. But then, we include stuff like that. We include, context on maybe key actors or the directors or the writers, not just on on the disc, but also in the booklets as well. Because if you read some of the reviews, or usually at least one review of any of our releases says, "Oh, these booklets are amazing. I'd pay 20 quid for one of those by itself." I was like, okay then. So it just goes. And again, what he shows is that for some of these labels, some of their releases, the booklets are sort of like throwaway items. But for ours, and it's not just for ours, other labels do it as well. I'm not claiming that sort of any genius in doing these, but they're very much seen as part of the package. So people will read through them, they'll refer back to them, they'll interact with them on their social media thing, and comment on them and stuff like that. And to have that done on a booklet is very rewarding, actually, because a lot of work goes into those, not just in the layout of them, but in there's maybe, for most of these booklets, there's usually 6 or 7 contributors to them. I make it a point of pride to sort of bring people in on doing these who are in tune with the product, and it really shows. It really does.
Well, I mean, if we use MANTRAP as an example, so here we go. We've got a film from 1952 that has now some interesting elements to it that might not have been quite as saleable actually at the time, which is that you've got Paul Henreid, Kay Kendall, who is co-starring with him, wasn't quite as well known yet. She was just to go on the rise. Genevieve hadn't come out. There's other things. Yep. And Lois Maxwell is really the main female lead of it, as it were. And she's 10 years away from James Bond, although she was appearing in films here. She'd done films in Hollywood. She was doing films in Italy. In some respects, she was at that time almost slightly better known in Italy than she was in the UK, certainly. So,
Yeah.
and yet now she's a well-known person. She's front and center on some of the artwork, and you never again. We'll have to talk about the artwork on your sets because they're lovely. But one of the things that I think is intriguing to say is that if we talk about MANTRAP, so here's this film produced in 52, comes out in 53, known in America as Man in Hiding. It's actually whodunit, but sort of falls within that kind of noir tradition in terms of style and approach. But it's in fact directed by Terence Fisher, who was Hammer's most famous and, in fact, busiest director ultimately in terms of, I think he made 29 films for the company. I think that's right. I did do a bit of counting before we started, so I thought.
I'm not going to dispute you on that. I mean, he was one of these directors who is very unshowy. You know, you read some a typical bad review of a Terence Fisher film is, he's not very interesting as a director because he doesn't draw attention to the camera. It's like, well, that's the whole point. Because the guy worked he came up through Gainsborough Films as an editor. So he basically shot and edited the film in camera, no waste whatsoever. And, you look at something like MANTRAP, the camera's moving all the time.
Yeah.
But he does it in such a way that you're not, there's no crash zooms, there's none of that sort of stuff. And it's a very unshowy, well, I mean, not until we get to Curse of Frankenstein anyway, and even that was somebody interviewed him in the 70s and said, that was a zoom shot. And he said, no, they didn't have zoom lenses back then. It was they did something with the focus as they dollied in.
Yeah. And they did have, but they didn't use it. That's the reality of it. Is that's the weird part about zoom lenses. I mean, technically, there's a zoom shot in Strangers on a Train, 1951. There's zoom shots from before then. There's zoom shots from the 30s. But they're weird, and they're usually because they're done as opticals, and in post production. That's the thing.
And the thing is, what you got to remember is that even though we look at something like, MANTRAP or Stolen Face or something now, you look at the cinematography, you think this is superb. You look at some of the performances, and they're unbeatable. Back in their day, these were just B films. No disrespect. I mean, it's not a pejorative term the way I'm using it, but they were seen as B films. They would go on a secondary circuit. They would play if they were lucky as the top half of a double bill, sometimes as a bottom half of one. But it was very much production line stuff. That's what they do. A film it would be the same to them as if they were working on a lathe. They didn't see them as art then, and they didn't see them as art in retrospect. It's only our viewpoint now that sees them like that. But the one thing that puts Hammer, not just at that vintage, but across its entire classic production period, above companies like Rank and stuff like that, is that they had they picked up a lot of really good technicians when Gainsborough went to the wall in the late 40s, and they basically, for 20 years more or less, with a little bit of shuffling around, the same guys stuck around. And I'm saying guys because it was mostly guys. But these people were superb technicians. And as a consequence, Hammer, who, were very budget conscious, could bring in something that looks absolutely stunning, whereas a lesser independent production company would turn in something that looks like 20 feet of old rope, So it's, the way I see Hammer as British film in microcosm, because it covered all the genres, went through war and crime and horror and comedy, which is also sometimes horrible when you think of omnibuses and stuff like that. Well, I mean, Hammer's in its 91st year now, so but just looking at his classic production period up as far as the mid 70s, it very definitely mirrors the entire British film ecosystem as it moves through. But it's better than the rest of it. And I'm not just saying this because obviously I work here, but because there was a dedication and a skill and a craft to it. And again, they weren't thinking they were making art while they were doing it. We were only putting that label on in retrospect. But these films entertained people worldwide. and they still do now. And that's a hard thing to do, because something I saw 50 years ago when I was a kid or whatever, I'll watch it now, I think, oh my God, what was I thinking? But you watch, if you saw Curse of Frankenstein in 1957, you're going to see it exactly the same way as if you saw it 25 minutes ago. It's still a stone cold classic, and that really is a hard thing to do, something like that, to create family. I know they don't all stand the pace, but more than average, I would say. I mean, what's your take on these? I mean, do you think, because obviously I sort of sound like I'm singing from the corporate hymn sheet. From the stuff that we've done over the last year, and there's a fair few crime films in there which are obviously your bag, but not just limited to those. Well, basically, do you think they've stood the test of time, for a phrase?
I think what's interesting about the Hammer films in particular, as you say, is because I think they follow certain patterns in terms of the kind of people that they hire. Mm-hmm. So on the one hand, you've got that family of technicians that kind of stay with the company for a really long time. There's the famous ones, the less famous ones, but people like Len Harris, mm-hmm. Jimmy Sangster, but also Rene Glynn, the sort of script supervisor extraordinaire. But they were with them for decades, which is amazing. And in a way, not entirely unique, because if, like you say, you go to Rank or something and you'd have somebody who works at the studio for a really long time. But because it was that family aesthetic, because of this idea that you worked in a studio that was actually a house. So it's a kind of home house idea. And so ultimately, when you look at these films, I think that dedication to craft comes through. These earlier ones, these black and white ones, which are made for the lower berth of a double bill, but on the secondary circuit, quite often they'd be moved up to the top half of the bill, because I think people really enjoyed them, but they also knew, I think somehow, that they had something a little bit more to offer, because a lot of the Bs were rubbish. There were interesting other companies like, say, Tempian, the Berman and Baker company, which were of higher quality, and a couple of others, but a lot of them really weren't. And so here, I think right away you could see that there had people like, say, Francis Searle, and then Terence Fisher, and maybe somebody like, they got the best out of even people like Montgomery Tully, who don't necessarily always get the credit they deserve, and occasionally the odd American director who's imported, but again, they do a good job. Also, we'd have somebody like, say, Ken Hughes, who would turn up and do maybe just one film, or Val Guest, who would do a lot of important films. So I look at that and I'm thinking, well, no, in the context of the period and knowing how they had to make them and the money they had to make them and the conditions that prevailed within the production line approach to shooting something in 15, maybe 20 days, depending on whether you had an American star or not, which usually meant you had a bit more time to make them. And shooting, in those limited number of spaces that were available primarily at what became Bray Studios, you just sort of think, no, this is terrific. I think you look at those and you're thinking, well, now that you've got an opportunity to see them technically at their best, because you're doing 4K restorations and you're currently releasing them in editions that offer both a 4K ultra high definition disc and a Blu-ray disc. What's intriguing is that you look at something like Spaceways, which has just been released. We're talking on the Monday that MANTRAP came out officially, so that was today. And we've got 36 Hours that's coming out in June. I think that's the release date. That's coming. And I think they all stand out in their own different ways. They're not all made by Terence Fisher necessarily. Tully, in fact, is the one who made 36 Hours. But I think that they're all unusual. They're all interesting. They all have unusual screenplays. They're ambitious, apart from anything else. You look at something like Spaceways, and you're thinking, look, you could write that off and say, I'm going to do a science fiction film with very, very limited resources. But it's also a spy movie. It's also a murder mystery. And I'm going to combine them all together. And I'm going to make something interesting that audiences are going to want to go see. And actually, I think it's a great movie.
Howard Duff, a man dedicated to the scientific conquest of space, deceived by a woman dedicated to pleasure.
You've got to take me away from this concentration camp.
And then these two disappeared.
You've got a little man running around loose inside your brain, just dying to get out and say something. Why don't you let him say it?
Murder.
It's got Alan Wheatley in it.
Yeah, who's brilliant, and yes, okay, not the toughest.
So would you call Spaceways then, and would you call Stolen Face as well? Would you call those film noir?
I think they're in the film noir style, which is, it sounds like a cop out, but I don't mean it to be. I think Stolen Face is film noir. I really do, because although Paul Henreid is fundamentally supposed to be a really nice guy and you're sort of on his side, he behaves in a kind of crazy, obsessive way that is utterly bonkers, very Frankensteinian, so which is always interesting, of course. And I think that from that point of view, that's a very film noir character. I think the idea that you have the good leading lady and the bad leading lady, the bad blonde, and except they both have the same face, but they're different people. And I think what could be more noirish than that? It's literally the Madonna whore complex in one, almost.
Well, yeah, but the pendulum has swung the other way on those, because back in the 50s, I am certain that the audience would have identified with the good one in Stolen Face, and the poor unfortunate, is it Lily? I've forgotten her name now, who gets the
I'll take your word for it. Can't remember either.
and who falls to her death at the end. It's like, yes, she was the bad girl. She deserved to die. But every single person who contributed to the new content for Stolen Face were all on Lily's side.
Yes.
Because as far as they're concerned now, at 50 years, 60 years, 70 years distance or whatever it is, she's the victim. She didn't want to be made up to look like the other one, and it was same film, same characters, completely different perception.
When you two came here 3 years ago and tried to convince me that a physical deformity might cause someone to become unbalanced enough to commit a crime, I thought you were a stark-raving mad. There was a girl transferred here about a week ago I'd like you to see. As a matter of fact, you'll find her an interesting case, a real tell-it.
Nobody wants someone like me around. Would you? Pretty, aren't I? Before I go, there's something I've got to tell you. David and I are getting married while we're away. 6 months from now, I'll be back here again.
What if you could make him attractive as you always wished to be?
Who are you trying to kid, mister?
He can do it, Lily. He's done it before.
Will you let me have the mirror? I want to see myself.
And some of that comes from Fisher, I think. I think what's interesting here is that there is a kind of instinctive understanding, particularly on his side, I think, of the way that some of the Gothic tropes work, because this does go back to Mary Shelley, if you will, and that's why he was so great at handling all the big titles that would come later as well, like Dracula and Frankenstein and The Mummy. From that point of view, I think that the sympathy lies where you don't expect it. I think the fact that Peter Cushing in Frankenstein, he's the central character. He's definitely not the hero. Here, it's much, much tougher in terms of the way it's handling the characters, and you can get invested with very dangerous sort of people, and you can actually, be much more ambivalent, and that feels much more modern. And that, I think, is what, they don't feel as, like old movies often can do, which is something that you can't connect with. And I think that's what's interesting about being able to review some of these films. It isn't just about nostalgia, because that can be a trap. And right away, I think you feel like these films were sort of... Stolen Face is an interesting example, precisely because of the way that it has that dichotomy. You get the two women who look alike but are completely different. You have the insanely controlling male character, the plastic surgeon, who thinks it'd be a marvelous idea to turn this woman who's had this terrible life and make her, through vaguely science fictional means.
Well, this is it. He does. He's the Frankenstein character in there, but he thinks he's a hero. He thinks he's doing everyone power good. Obviously, he's not, but nevertheless,
he's bonkers, and I think that's really interesting. But equally, I think that when you look at something like MANTRAP, where on the one hand you've got Paul Henreid in a more conventional kind of amateur sleuth sort of character, and it is a bit like The Thin Man. It's Nick and Nora Charles, him and Kay Kendall, and it works splendidly. And I love that. Every time I see them as a couple, as an investigator couple, I always think, I wish there was a bit more Kay Kendall, but I love it all the same. It's great. But you've got that, you've got the Woman in Jeopardy narrative with Lois Maxwell, and that suddenly is very noirish. So the lighting is different and the situations are different. And so you're shooting that for maximum psychological suspense and impact, whereas the sort of investigation type stuff is all done with a very light touch. And so you have these two different sorts of stories, and actually that dichotomy, I think, is brave, but also difficult to handle. It's hard to have a film that can manage two such seemingly different sort of styles and keep them both going. And it does, because she's sort of linked to the Kira Moore character, who's the one who's escaped from, we know it's Broadmoor, but they don't say it's Broadmoor in the film. An asylum for the criminally insane, or for the very, very nervous, which is, I think, what we call it in the audio commentary, unless you edited that out, Steve, because James and I thought that was funny. And probably should say up front, so I and James Harrison of Film Noir UK did one of the two audio commentaries for MANTRAP, which we thought was just a great film to talk about, because I think we both like it so much. So it's just so entertaining. But those changes in focus, that shift in perspective, so that you get those scenes that are done at St. Paul's and it's all bombed out and looks terrible. It reminds you, it's 1952 and London's in a terrible state. They haven't really started the rebuilding. They're still rationing. And you've got all of that. And yet you still have people going around in tuxedos and having midnight parties and having a good time. And it manages to finesse it. I think that's hard. And I think it does it well.
Well, you've answered the question I was about to ask. I was going to ask, did you feel that the narrative was jarring? But obviously you didn't.
No, I think because as you say, I think what's interesting about this with something like Stolen Face or even Spaceways is the collision, even at a genre level, but certainly in terms of presentation, you sometimes feel like you're watching more than one film in one go. I think that speaks to their ambition, to their desire to do something a little bit different. You can sort of say, yeah, you're a bit mad to try, but actually I think they're mostly succeeding. I think you can forgive certain things because you know the realities of what was involved in making it, but actually sort of thinking, but no, this is fantastic. You're not settling. You're saying, I want to give this a go. And in this case, it does help that you've got some really good actors here. Paul Henreid's very good.
He is exceptionally good.
And Elizabeth Scott, who has the two roles in Stolen Face, not easy. I think she does okay. But she was someone who was, at that point, only associated with film noir roles. She eventually did an Elvis Presley movie, but at that time, that's what she was known for. And I think it comes across very strongly, and that isn't always true, but Howard Duff is actually great in Spaceways. I think he has some nice scenes with Eva Bartok as well. Not necessarily the most expressive actress in the world, but actually she's fine in it. And again, it suits the film. It suits the role that she has in it. So I think they're all terrific. So I think it's fantastic that you're putting these out, because you finally get to enjoy them in a way that you don't have to make excuses for. They look great, because apart from anything else, we've gotten used to the fact that you put up with quite a lot of nonsense, particularly new films and certainly television, where you can achieve a lot digitally. But the fact is that these are much more carefully calibrated, much more carefully made, and made with a bit of love. And I think it's still there. So you can enjoy it on that basis. That you've made some very good choices, it seems to me, in terms of giving us some variety. For those fans who are interested in getting these big box sets, I mean, they've got multiple editions within the discs. So you'll get, say, a US version and a UK version, which is going to be true for MANTRAP, certainly. And I mean, the booklet's 120 pages long?
Yeah. I mean, we could say we could call them a book. I think we
think so. At this point, it doesn't really count as a booklet. It's perfect bound book after all, and also you're doing other kinds of publishing. Before I forget, so you're putting out some LPs, right? Tell us a bit about the LPs.
Well, currently the one that's been scheduled, and actually scheduled, it's on sale. It's selling very well, actually. Is some of James Bernard's musical score for Curse of Frankenstein. Now, the original recording session tapes, they've long since disappeared or been reused or whatever. And so if you went to Discogs or eBay and went looking for Curse of Frankenstein, up until about a couple of months ago, what you'd find is some really good cover versions. Orchestra of Prague or some Philharmonic Orchestra of Prague, something like that, and they're really good. But of course, when you're a film fan, you want to hear the note accurate versions from your favorite film. And when we were doing the Curse of Frankenstein restoration last year, one of the things that we do, I mean, obviously, as well as restoring the picture, we also restore the audio. For something that's of the vintage of Curse of Frankenstein, is basically what you have what's called a flat mono track. So you've got the dialogue, the music, and the effects. And that's the only thing that exists. But what we do when we do the 4Ks Blu-rays is that we go through an additional step to make a new 5.1 sound. Now, obviously, these things weren't made at a time when 5.1 was a thing. But using technology, what it can actually do is you can take a flat mono soundtrack, it can digitally extract the dialogue so that you're left with the sound effects and the music. And obviously, it would be lovely if it could separate the music from the sound effects as well. But technology just isn't there. It couldn't denote the difference between, say, a gunshot and a cymbal crash or whatever. It just couldn't. 5 years' time, who can tell? So what that allows the clever audio boffins to do by stripping out the dialogue is to use the original mono and the bits they've stripped out in such a way is that it creates a very light touch 5.1, but enough for people who have home 5.1 systems to appreciate an audio difference between that and the mono. Anyway, we do that as standard for all the restorations. And what we also do as standard is we take the music and effects track and we extract what music we can, just primarily to play out behind the image gallery, just so that, it's not a 5-minute watch of, mute stills flipping around the screen. And we did it, and we managed to extract about 13 minutes worth of clean music. And because I'm a geek, I had this music on rotation for a couple of days while I'm doing this stuff. And it's just playing and playing and playing. And I'm thinking, actually, this is quite good. So I sent it to David Stoner at Silver Screen. Silver Screen have been releasing Hammer releases, CDs and vinyl going back as far as early 90s, I think. And I said, David, this is brilliant. Listen to this. Do you think it has merit as a physical release? And it's like, yeah. No one's ever heard the original soundtrack before. Okay, it didn't come from the original source tapes, but the technology's there to sweeten. This is standard terminology, not a word I've just made up. Sweeten the audio so that it sounds as good as it possibly can for vinyl and for CD. And we thought, okay, then is there a market for this? And the answer is yes. And it sounds really, and obviously we created, when we do these things, at the very least, we like to make anything that we create look really cool. So, we know for a fact, because people have told us, that there are certain fans who've bought the 7-inch double EP of Curse of, they don't have a vinyl deck, but it's a lovely piece of Hammer merchandise for them. They might do one day, who can tell? Maybe they're just future-proofing themselves. But it's, if you're just buying it as an artifact, it looks lovely. If you're buying it as a single, it sounds great. And I'm not just saying that because, I was part of the team that put it together. It really does sound good. It's better than it has any right to be. Because if you think, I've listened to soundtrack CDs previously where the source is from an M&E track and they sound absolutely awful.
Sure. Yeah.
But
also because of the variations in the sound levels, right? Because they're just constantly going up and down.
This is where the wizards at Silver Screen did their magic and even things out and sweeten things and all this sort of stuff which to me is just complete witchcraft. But the end result is 13 minutes of original James Bernard score, which we would otherwise not have available again. I think that's fantastic. Cool. So we're looking towards doing more if possible going forward.
Great.
There's obviously people out there who want this sort of stuff, and including me, because I love it.
So you're also doing a bit more publishing in terms of paper-based publication. Tell me a little bit more about that.
It was announced a couple of weeks ago. One of the things that we're doing in partnership with Titan Books is that we are reprinting 2 books, but it's effectively 8 novelizations of 8 films. These were done in the 1960s And this was at a point where if you didn't see a film in a cinema, or you couldn't get into a cinema because you were a small fellow and you didn't look, you were 18 or whatever, it was 16, the X certificate back then, wasn't it? Then you could only vicariously get your Hammer fix through reading these adaptations. And there's a lot of people out there who are my age now, late 50s, early 60s, whose initial introduction, gateway, Hammer, was reading these adaptations. And of course, as is the way these things, they went out of print in the early 70s. You want a mint copy now, it'll cost you 3 figures. So about a year and a half ago, Titan approached us and said, we'd like to reprint these books. Can we do it? We looked into the right situation, and with Titan, we got it sorted out. So as a consequence, there were 2 volumes back in the 60s. There was the Hammer Horror Omnibus, lovely old term there, which basically means, well, apart from the fact it means a bus, it means that there's for these stories in the book. And then there's the second Hammer Horror Omnibus. They obviously didn't go too far. So we didn't want to rename them because the name of the volumes is part of its thing. So what we've done is we've reprinted them in their 2-volume state. We've got some lovely new introductions and end pieces from Ramsey Campbell and Steve Laws and Stephen Gallagher, and Stephen Volk, lots of Stevens in there, who again grew up with these things.
Yeah.
And they were only too pleased to contribute it. And we've got 2 lovely covers from Graham Humphreys. And yeah, I mean, to all intents and purposes, they're just reprints, but they're reprints of something which is a very specific evocation for certain Hammer fans, very specific. Like I said, it was their gateway into the thing. I mean, they probably read the Reptile and Plague of the Zombies chapters to death before they ever saw the films. So we're bringing it back and giving it its day in the sun again. It's going like gangbusters. So there's a lot of love and a lot of appreciation for this sort of stuff, because again, it's one of those things no one ever thought that we'd do new versions of them. Like, we can't take the credit for it. It was Titan that suggested it, but we worked with them very closely to get these looking as cool as they can. That's the thing. I mean, we've got to make these things look cool, otherwise,
what's the point? Exactly.
Yeah, well, it is. What's the point? It's
the 21st century. Yeah.
It shows this version of Hammer as part of John Gore Studios. It shows, I think, the commitment to what has come before, whilst bringing it forward. And also, we don't just do these things for people like me. We're also, if there's a new audience out there for it, and I know it sounds like we're chasing these sort of things, but it's amazingly, I know several. I'm an old git, but I know several young people, and they would watch things like Blood Orange and The Man in Black, and they love them. And it's, you would not think it. I mean, it's not something they'd need to devote 80 minutes of their time to watch. It's old, it's black and white. They look cool, but what does that mean to today's film collector of a younger age? And yet they're buying into it. They love it. And of course, for somebody who's in their 20s, the more context or something like that, the better. It just gives them a nostalgia hit for something which is way, way before their time. Yeah, but it also answers the experience as well.
I mean, it's not like they're only, you have to be a Tom Conway fan or a Sid James fan to appreciate these. Very far from it. But they're making new fans, maybe.
It's especially for the crime films. There are so many entry points for these things. I mean, you mentioned the pseudo Nick and Nora vibe you were getting off it. Now, I got that, but I also got proto Steed and Mrs. Peel.
Sure. Yeah. Especially when they talk about guns. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And she's sitting there cleaning a pair of purdies or whatever.
Yeah.
And they're just talking away like it's the most normal thing in the world. And it's not outside the bounds of reason. Brian Clemens was a jobbing writer at that point. He was working for the Danzigers. Yeah. That could have planted a seed there. Who can tell? Would you then watch that film because you're a crime fan, because you like the screwball crime comedies of the 30s and 40s, because you're an Avengers fan, because you're a Hammer fan. I mean, there's so many entry points for these things, possibly more than the horrors, to be honest with you.
The value-added content in these sets, which, you know, look beautiful all on their own. In fact, one of the reviews of MANTRAP has noticed that on one of the video extras that I appear in, on my shelf behind my head, there are some of the Hammer box sets that say, "Have you seen what he's got behind on his shelf?" You know, so that's sort of interesting. So that was great. That really made me laugh. But what is fantastic is that I think you've got some lovely paintings as well. You know, sort of lovely covers that are new. It isn't just sort of fixing up the old poster, shall we say, because in fact a lot of the poster artwork from the 50s is sometimes a little bit disappointing, and so these feel like you've taken the best of them and given them a dynamic push that they wouldn't have had, but also with all the extra value added content that you're putting in there, which isn't just that direct telling of the story. It's also telling you about the people who are involved, but also telling you about the environment in which they were made or the genre that they belong to. I mean, the Man in Black, I mean, I love that, but partly because I'm a huge John Dixon Carr fan. I have every single one of his books on the back of my shelves. I've written about his radio plays, you know, so I was just loving what Martin had to say, you know, and all these sorts of things. They're all terrific. You know, and Andrew, of course, wrote an essay about Appointment with Fear with, you know, Valentine Dial and all these things, which are fantastic. And, you know, and that may, you know, speak to a certain kind of nostalgia, but I think they're all eminently rediscoverable. And I think they're all just absolutely fascinating. It's just so much extra ways to get into the films themselves and then go out again. And I think that's extraordinary.
What we do is we make them as cool and as wonderful. I mean, people who buy these sets, you won't find them punting them at CEX the next day. You know, they buy these sets, they're going to want to keep them. And that starts with the artwork you just mentioned. And we use a variety of artists. We make sure they're sympathetic with the source material. And the brief we always give them, because it's not confusing at all, we say we want something old but new. It needs to have modern sensibilities, but it also needs to look like or be adjacent to something that will be done at the time. So if you look at the artwork for MANTRAP, that's done by a lovely guy called Daniel Lorente, and he's very in tune with his noir sensibilities. And he did Whispering Smith, and he's done a couple of other ones for us as well. And when people see that artwork, and not just his, obviously the other artwork, you look at the Men in the Sherwood Forest stuff or the Spaceway stuff, you look at that and you think, damn, that looks good. I really want to see what's inside that box. And then, of course, they get the lovely 4K restorations, but they also get all of that added context as well. And for people who were around back then, which I've got to admit is going to be vanishingly thin because some of these are like 70 years old, it might give them a frisson of nostalgia. But for most people, it's going to be new context on old stuff. And we try to make these things as interesting as possible. We seek out experts. We seek out fun people like yourself who are also experts. And it's a bit Reithian that we're sort of, I mean, we're not out to educate. We're out to entertain, really. But if you can educate and entertain at the same time, then it's win-win because people are learning more about the film. And for Man in Black, there was an embarrassment of riches there because it's the John Dixon Carr angle. Then you've also got the fact that it came out of wartime BBC radio as well, so we covered that. And the guys who worked on that, they blew it away. I mean, it was brilliant. And I always know when I watch these things in edit form, if it interests me and I learn new stuff, then it's going to do the same for other people as well. And, you know, I mean, Andrew and Martin on John Dixon Carr, they were just, you know, it was just, you didn't need to know anything about that writer before you started. And after that 30 minutes or whatever it is, you knew everything. But it wasn't, you know, syringed into your brain. It just came out naturally. And the best possible thing that could have happened coming out of that is people think, that sounds like a cool guy. I might go and read one of his books. Wouldn't that be brilliant? I mean,
which the British Library is currently republishing. Yeah, so there you go, in the case of Carr. Although, yes, I don't know if anybody's planning to republish Elliston Trevor, who wrote the book that MANTRAP is based on. He's a slightly more difficult proposition. Some of his books are never going to go out of print. The ones that this film is based on, the series, I'm not so sure. I'd love it if they did. You should do posters, though.
Posters? Well...
Of the artwork. I mean, come on. I'd buy that.
Artwork. Well, it's been mentioned. It's been discussed. Obviously, what we've done so far, we've done poster of the new Frankenstein artwork last year, and that sold very well. Sold out, actually. These things usually do. No one's discussed doing the Sherwood Forest or Spaceways or something like that, but it might be nice maybe to do a calendar with them on, or a set of prints or something.
That'd be marvelous.
It would be. They're such good pieces of art.
Yeah, I mean, the MANTRAP ones are my current faves, but in actual fact, the ones from Whispering Smith, particularly Greta Gate, right? Yeah. I want that on my wall. Absolutely. Sorry, I interrupted you. No, the the Hugo Bishop mysteries. Yeah, there were 6 of those. One of them filmed with as MANTRAP, and the other 5. A couple of them got reprinted in paperback in the UK. 5 of them got reprinted in the US in the 70s under a different pseudonym. And one of them never got reprinted. And so, in fact, when I wrote that piece for you, I had to go to the British Library and get a copy from them.
Oh, wow.
Because I couldn't, well, I somewhat to my horror, a different kind of horror, I discovered, I don't seem to have the last one. What's going on? I thought I'd had them on my shelves forever. I go, look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So, and it turned out I had a 6th one, but it was a variant title. I actually had that one already. So I thought, and I had to go to the British Library. I had to go read it there. So I don't actually have my own copy. It only ever came out in hardback once. That was it.
I was going to say, why do you think that because the MANTRAP is an adaptation of the second book, isn't it?
Yeah, Queen in Danger. Yeah.
So why do you think they did? I mean, obviously it was done at the time when this was the new book, but would there have been any particular reason to take that one over the first one? Is there a better story or a?
Yes, is the answer to that. The second one is a better, in terms of making a movie out of it. It's definitely the better story. It's got more characters. It's a better whodunit. Each one of the books is very different and takes a different approach to the mystery genre. And the first one is more of a kind of psychological suspense story. You know who it is about 70% of the way in, and then it's really Hugo, our hero, squaring off against the person who's responsible. And then we get to see their diary. And you get to revisit the entire story from the point of view of shall we say, a diseased mind. So that's what he wanted to bring to the story. He wanted to make it a bit different. The second one is a more conventional whodunit with a reveal at the end, and it's actually got more story, more characters, more events, more things happen, more dead bodies. Okay. What can I tell you? So you can see why they went for the second one.
I can see, but did they just? I mean, I'm just asking questions now. Did they? Was the whole St. Paul's thing in the book, or was that something invented purely for the film?
Now you're asking.
Because in the film, it's a character. It is.
I don't think it's specifically St. Paul's. I think that that he's hiding out in the place where the murder took place. So it's, in other words, you can either see it as the murderer going back to the scene of the crime, or he's gone back because it's this chap who had for a time lost his memory and went to jail because they said he committed the murder. But he's gone back there because he now knows, he didn't initially know, he now knows he didn't do it. And he knows, he says, the face of the one who did do it, and because he's a painter, so he's drawn it, but he doesn't actually know who that person is. It could be anyone. He just doesn't know. Right. He just knows it was whoever this person's face is, or I don't remember it being near St. Paul's. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's not. Right. But on the other hand, I think the book rights must have been purchased when it was still in galleys. It hadn't come out at the time, and that's one of the things I point out in the essay, which is that in the film credits it's based on the novel by Alliston Trevor, and most people didn't know that because he was using this other pseudonym, Simon Rattray, to publish those books. So they kind of slightly let the cat out of the bag. He just ignored it. So they never admitted it. But yeah, and then something odd seems to have happened. When they decided to reprint them in the States, they used the Adam Hall pseudonym that he was using after the Quiller Memorandum became so successful, which is actually the title of the movie. But, 19 books of those, and they were all published as by Adam Hall. And so they used that pseudonym to sell the paperbacks, very belated paperbacks. They were coming out like 15 years after the hardbacks came out in the UK.
Wow.
And they only did the first 5, and I don't know if it's simply maybe they didn't sell enough, or I wonder if it's actually an oversight. I think they didn't know, because the 6th one was belatedly released, and it was around the time that Trevor left the country. And I think sometimes things just get lost in the mix. So it's a curious thing. Anyway, the one thing I wanted to ask you about was, because you've announced it, so I don't know if this is something we can talk about or not, is, so 36 Hours, it's coming out in June. So that stars film noir legend Dan Duryea. So he ends up in London, doesn't he?
He ends up in London. When you watch the beginning of the film, you think it's another Duryea hard-boiled baddie role, but he plays completely against type. He's the good guy in this one, and he turns in a really good performance. The plot of the story is he is United States Air Force major. He had a wartime marriage, or various post-war. No, it's a wartime marriage. So I'm confusing myself. Which got a bit rocky. He was then posted back to the US and left his wife, who it's been about a year, I think. He's heard nothing from her in months, so he's coming back to find out what's happening. I won't spoil it further than that. It's a really, really good Brit noir, man on the run, must prove his innocence before the police catch him because they think he's the baddie. And you've got Eric Pohlman, and you've got Kenneth Griffith, and you've got a bunch of the best Weasley character actors, and an incredible who was that guy? John Chandos.
Yeah.
Anyone who drops a kitten from their arm after, and that won't mean anything to anyone until they see the film. He may as well have a T-shirt that just says "baddie boo hiss." But it's a really cool. It's probably about as close that a Brit noir can get to being a US film noir, I think. Really,
so.
Some of the lightings, some of the tropes, because there's a big thing we've got on that set. What is a Brit noir? And I don't think there's any clear answer to that, really. I mean, what is a film noir to start off with? You talk to a dozen different people, they have a dozen different ideas. I mean, it's obviously a mood style. But is it anything beyond that? I don't know.
Let's put it this way. If you were releasing, say, something like Man Bait, or, for instance, or Heatwave, which, of course, Once Upon a Time came out from Network. I think that some people would recognize that right away because it's about marital discord. In those cases, it's kind of the postman always rings twice. It's that the wife's going to knock off the husband who's got all the money, and she gets a lover, and they're going to kill him, and then what happens? So that fulfills that one. And then say you have a Private Eye one, then it fulfills that one, as you do with Whispering Smith. Here, I think what's so good about this is that, it fulfills that, but what's interesting is that it tweaks it along the way. You've got the American noir protagonist, absolutely. The guy's convinced his wife is up to no good. He's come back. There's a murder. He ends up on the run. I mean, what could be more noirish than that? But it's in England. It's about him and the Brits, and it changes not the style, but the flavour. And at the same, so you get both, I think, and that genuinely to extend that metaphor, it is having your cake and eating it, because that way you get to enjoy both aspects of it. You get the advantage of it being a Hammer movie with, Harold Lang, people like that, fantastic character actors, shooting in, not just in London, in fact, they're also shooting in Windsor, in one of their favourite streets, lovely cobbled streets. And so that night, all that great look. But at the same time, it's also telling you something about what Britain was like in 1952, 1953, which is, for instance, still during rationing. It has a completely different sensibility. And there aren't any other Americans in it, except the people he flies in and flies out with, so...
Well, I'm one of those. Lee Patterson's Canadian, so it's
exactly, right. I mean, okay, I'm talking about characters rather than actual actors, but the idea being that he always has to sort of slightly explain himself, and he has to try and understand them. And in a way, that's sort of, it almost becomes a film noir about film noir, because you have to sort of explain the rules because you're in an unusual environment. I think it's great. I'm really looking forward to when that comes out. Thanks for getting me into some of these DVDs and Blu-rays and 4Ks. It's been marvellous.
Our pleasure.
I'll see you for some filming next week. Are you going to be there?
Yes, I will.
Because you're a very busy guy. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, next week we're going to be... That's the Eurocrime one next week.
Yeah,
for a title which we can't say out loud yet. It will be mentioned soon enough, and that'll be a really cool thing that ties in British crime films, European crime films, Sangsters, European psychoterror, mini Hitchcock things. Big, sprawling, lovely, lovely bit of context piece. Looking forward to working on that one.
That's going to be brilliant. Well, thanks very much for dropping by, Steve, and I'll see you in about a week and a bit.
No problem. Anytime. Cheers, then, Sergio.
Take care.
Ta-da.
You have been listening to Tipping My Fedora, the show about all things noir. It is produced for Castiglione Publishing by me, Sergio Angelini, and our theme tune is by Petar Milinkovic, whose work is available through Tailkeeper Music. All audio clips are the copyright of their respective owners, and used under fair dealing and fair use exceptions solely for the purposes of criticism and review. Please subscribe to Tipping My Fedora wherever you get your podcast fix. And it would be great if you could leave ratings and reviews about the show at Apple Podcasts. Be seeing you.